Adolf Hitler's death brought an abrupt end to one of the darkest eras in human history. On April 30th, 1945, the Führer took his own life in his Berlin bunker as the Soviets closed in, ending the reign of the Nazis. Before his death, Hitler had seen himself as the savior of Germany. Following the country's humiliating defeat in World War I, Hitler had promised to return Germany to a position of strength. The Great Depression, which hit Germany particularly hard, provided fertile soil for the Nazis' rise to power. While writing Mein Kampf in 1924, Hitler claimed that Germany's problems could be pinned on two enemy groups: countries like France, who exacted punitive measures after World War I, and Jewish people, who polluted the purity of the so-called master race of white Aryans. Hitler rode a wave of domestic discontent to power and became Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Then he quickly established himself as a dictator. His Nazi party banned other political parties and suppressed all opposition. Wielding power, Hitler invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, triggering the outbreak of World War II in Europe. Over the next several years, he would invade other European countries, execute political rivals at home, persecute Germany's Jews, and plot the formation of horrific concentration camps. But by April 1945, the tides had turned. Germany was mere weeks away from defeat, and Adolf Hitler's death was just around the corner. In 1945, Germany was on its knees, and few were surprised. The writing had been on the wall for 2 years, ever since the Soviet Union defeated the Germans at the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943. The next year, Allied forces landed at Normandy and began pushing the Nazis back toward Berlin. By July 1944, a handful of German military commanders were plotting to assassinate Hitler. By casting aside the dictator, they hoped to negotiate favorable peace terms. But their assassination attempt failed, and Hitler executed 4,000 Germans whom he believed were involved. As Soviet troops advanced toward Berlin in early 1945, other Allied forces were also closing in from the west. Meanwhile, Hitler seemed to vanish. American military forces initially believed that Hitler was hiding away in the Bavarian Alps at his fortress, known as the Eagle's Nest. In March 1945, American forces in southern Germany heard reports that as many as 300,000 Nazi loyalists were hiding in the mountains, supplied by an underground weapons factory. Dwight D. Eisenhower, then serving as Supreme Commander of the Allied forces, feared that they would carry out a guerrilla campaign and drag the war out for years rather than surrender. In reality, the Nazi propaganda machine was working overtime to hide the true whereabouts of Hitler as the war effort in Germany fell apart. Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels took to the radio to declare that Hitler's werewolves would defend the dictator to the death. "We werewolves consider it our supreme duty to kill, and to kill." Meanwhile, Hitler had never left Berlin. He had been hiding in his bunker for most of 1945. When Allied forces captured Wehrmacht officer Kurt Dittmar, he revealed that the Führer was still in Berlin. Eerily, he also predicted how Hitler would die. Hitler will either be killed there or commit suicide. In the coming days, Dittmar's conjecture would prove to be true. With the Red Army storming in from the east and other Allied forces moving in from the west, Adolf Hitler realized the war was lost. On January 16, 1945, Hitler retreated to his underground bunker, which stood more than 50 feet below the Chancellery in Berlin. Known as the Führer bunker, the 2,700-square-foot shelter had a well to provide fresh water and generators to supply electricity. From this hideaway, surrounded by luxurious furniture and expensive paintings, Hitler directed the war from underground. The reinforced concrete bunker withstood Allied bombing raids and protected Hitler and other important Nazi leaders like Joseph Goebbels. But it didn't protect Hitler from other issues, like poor health and early aging. After years of warfare, Hitler's hair had turned grey. A tremor appeared on his left side, and his eyesight had grown poor. Just 55, Hitler appeared much older. However, his appearance was soon the least of his concerns. By April 1945, the Wehrmacht had collapsed. The Red Army reached Berlin with a force of 2.5 million soldiers, who were hungry to hunt down the man who was responsible for so much suffering. The end had finally come. Adolf Hitler dismissed the idea of trying to escape as Soviet troops entered Berlin. He feared capture more than death, especially since he had heard a rumor that the Soviets wanted to lock him in a cage and parade him through Berlin. The humiliation was more than he could bear. But the Soviets were getting closer. As the end of April drew near, the Red Army was within 300 yards of the Führer bunker. Still, Hitler fought on. He ordered German troops to fight to the death, issuing orders from the Führer bunker that promised a death sentence for any military commanders who retreated from the Soviet advance. But behind the scenes, Hitler recognized the hopelessness of the situation. On April 22nd, Hitler called two of his secretaries, Christa Schröder and Johanna Wolff, into his office. He received us in his room looking tired, pale, and listless, Schröder reported. Hitler told his secretaries, "Over the last 4 days, the situation has changed to such an extent that I find myself forced to disperse my staff. As you are the longest serving, you will go first. In an hour, a car leaves for Munich." Privately, the Führer began to put his affairs in order. But just before Hitler's death, he decided to marry his longtime mistress, Eva Braun. One day before Adolf Hitler died, the Führer decided it was time to get married. On April 29, 1945, he wed Eva Braun, his mistress of 16 years. Braun and Hitler had first met in 1929, when 17-year-old Braun was working in a Munich photography studio. Braun described the leader of the Nazi Party as a gentleman of a certain age with a funny mustache. Throughout their 16 years together, Hitler hid his relationship with Braun from the outside world. But she was still devoted to him. When Hitler survived an assassination attempt in 1944, Braun vowed, "From our first meeting I swore to follow you anywhere, even unto death. I live only for your love." Braun joined Hitler in his bunker in April 1945. With the Red Army steps away, the two exchanged wedding vows underground. Before their wedding, Hitler had initially ordered Braun to leave, but she refused and promised fidelity to him until the end. This wasn't surprising, especially since Braun had once told her friends, "Better that 10,000 others die than he be lost to Germany." Braun would follow Hitler anywhere, even into death. With Braun by his side, Adolf Hitler learned about Benito Mussolini's execution and how his corpse was defiled by angry citizens. Vowing to avoid the same fate, the Nazi dictator was determined to die on his own terms. He would die by suicide, and his remains would be burned. On April 29th, Hitler began preparing for his death. He ordered his bodyguards to destroy his personal papers. He also told a doctor to test a cyanide capsule out on his beloved dog Blondie to make sure it worked. Not only would killing her confirm the pill's efficacy for Hitler's suicide, but it would also ensure that Blondie would not fall into the hands of the Soviets after Hitler was gone. Still, after the dog died, Hitler was inconsolable. The next morning, April 30th, a staff member overheard Braun crying, "I would rather die here. I do not want to escape." By that point, escape would have been nearly impossible anyway. The Red Army was nearly on top of the Führer bunker. Hitler ate his final meal, pasta with tomato sauce, as Goebbels tried to convince the Führer not to kill himself. "Doctor, you know my decision," Hitler said to Goebbels. "There is no change. You can, of course, leave Berlin with your family." Goebbels would not, and neither would his family. Not long after Hitler's suicide, Goebbels and his wife would kill themselves, and their own children as well.
Hitler assembled his personal staff and shook everyone's hand. Braun also said her goodbyes. "Please do try to get out. You may yet make your way through. And give Bavaria my love."
While misinformation would later be spread about how Adolf Hitler died, He made no secret of his plans to end his own life. And according to witnesses, Hitler was also very specific about how he was going to kill himself.
Hitler said in a calm voice, "I am going to shoot myself now. You know what you have to do."
Hitler then gave a Nazi salute and announced, "It is finished. Goodbye." Deep inside the bunker, Hitler and Braun locked themselves in a private room on the afternoon of April 30th, 1945. Eva took a cyanide capsule and waited for it to kill her. Hitler also swallowed a cyanide pill, then shot himself with a pistol. Outside the room, Hitler's loyalists waited for the gunshot.
Suddenly, there is the sound of a shot, so loud, so close, that we all fall silent. It echoes on through all the rooms.
I saw Hitler slumped by the table. I didn't see any blood on his head, and I saw Eva with her knees drawn up lying next to him on the sofa, wearing a white and blue blouse with a little collar, just a little thing. Shortly after Adolf Hitler's death, his Führer bunker loyalists carried their bodies to a small garden just outside the bunker. The sounds of battle surrounded them, including the sharp retort of Soviet small arms fire. As Hitler had ordered, his body would be burned, and Braun's would be burned as well. Goebbels and Bormann doused the bodies in petrol. Alongside the bunker guards, they lit the pyre and quickly withdrew to safety. Hitler's inner circle wanted to completely destroy his body. Even though there was no chance that Hitler's enemies would kill him now, his loyalists didn't want Hitler's death, or his remains, to be used for propaganda purposes. But despite their efforts to burn the entire corpse, a small portion of Hitler's jaw, with a few disease-ridden teeth, remained. Documents would eventually reveal that Soviet troops indeed recovered Hitler's remains. But, in the final days of war and for decades after, rumors swirled that Hitler still lived. On May 1st, 1945, Karl Dönitz, a German admiral who briefly served as the country's head of state, prepared to address the German people on the radio and tell them about Adolf Hitler's death. But Dönitz was hesitant to tell the truth about how Hitler died. So instead of admitting that Hitler killed himself, Dönitz claimed that the Führer had died in battle, fighting at the head of his troops. Without a body, and with little official word regarding Hitler's death, conspiracy theories quickly began to spread. Some claimed that Hitler had escaped and was living in a cave in the Italian Alps. Others reported seeing the dictator at a French casino. The Soviets added to the confusion by publicly stating in June 1945 that they had not found Hitler's remains, suggesting to many that he still lived. And before long, many of the top brass of the Allied powers were suggesting that the Nazi dictator was still alive and had escaped to South America. From secrecy to disinformation, many people in power laid a fertile ground for disbelief in the official story, which still lingers to this day. At one point, US officials even tried to hunt down Hitler in Argentina, where he was once rumored to be living in an underground hideout. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally investigated the report, finally concluding that no serious indication has been received that Adolf Hitler is in Argentina. In 2018, French scientists were finally able to prove that Hitler's death took place in 1945. By analyzing remains of the dictator's teeth, preserved by the Soviets, the scientists conclusively identified the remains as authentic. Though more than 7 decades have passed since Hitler's demise, it remains one of the most heavily examined and controversial deaths of all time. The details are ever more haunting when considering Hitler's horrific legacy. As one historian wrote, "Never in history has such ruination, physical and moral, been associated with the name of one man."